Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of Voss Files with me, Clara Voss, your true crime bestie, here to break down another true crime case for you today. And let me just tell you, this case that we're covering today is like one of the saddest and most haunting mysteries in American history. Because for over 65 years, this little boy had no name, no identity, nobody claimed him, nobody reported him missing, and he became known simply as the boy in the box, or America's Unknown Child. So, this case takes place in Philadelphia back in 1957. And on February 25th of that year, a little boy's body was discovered in a cardboard box on the side of a road in the Fox Chase neighborhood. He had passed away from severe injuries. He was malnourished, his hair had been crudely cut, and for decades, nobody knew who he was. But here's the good news. In December 2022, after 65 years, police finally identified him. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was only 4 years old when he passed away. And while his identity is now known, the circumstances of his passing are still unsolved. So today, we're going to talk about Joseph's story, how he was found, the investigation, and how they finally figured out who he was after all these years. So let's get into it. All right, so like I said, on February 25th, 1957, a college student was driving through the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia, and he spotted a rabbit running into some underbrush on the side of Susquehanna Road. Now, he knew that there were animal traps in that area, so he stopped his car to go check it out. And when he went into the woods, he found something absolutely horrific. It was a cardboard box, a large JCPenney bassinet box, and inside that box was the body of a little boy. Now, here's the thing, you guys. This college student wasn't actually the first person to find the body. A few days earlier, another young man had been checking his rabbit traps in that same area, and he had come across the box. But when he looked inside and saw what he thought was a doll, he didn't report it. And the reason he didn't report it was because he was afraid the police would confiscate his traps. Which, I mean, I get that he was scared, but like, you see a body and you don't call the police? It's just, it's wild to me. But anyway, he didn't report it, so it wasn't until a few days later when the college student found the body that police were finally called to the scene. When investigators arrived, they were absolutely shocked by what they found. The little boy was naked. He had been wrapped in a plaid blanket and placed inside this cardboard box. His body was covered in bruises. He had been severely harmed. There were bruises on his face, on his chest, on his arms, on his legs. He also appeared to be extremely malnourished, like he had not been fed properly in a very long time. And his hair had been recently cut, but not in a normal way. It looked like someone had taken clippers and just hacked it off in a very crude, rushed manner. In fact, clumps of his hair were still stuck to his body when they found him. The medical examiner determined that the little boy had passed away from blunt force trauma to the head. Basically, he had sustained fatal injuries. He also had some scars on his body that appeared to be surgical scars. There was an L-shaped scar under his chin, a scar on his ankle, and a scar on his groin. So clearly, at some point in his short life, he had undergone some kind of medical procedures. His hands and feet were also described as being pruny, which suggested that he had been in water at some point before he passed away. Now, the police, they assumed that once they put out the word that they had found this little boy's body, someone would come forward. Like, surely his parents would report him missing. Surely a neighbor, a teacher, a family member, somebody would recognize him and say, that's so-and-so, that's my neighbor's kid, that's my student. But nobody did. Nobody came forward. And that was when investigators realized that this was going to be a much bigger mystery than they initially thought. So the police did everything they could to try and identify this little boy. They took his fingerprints, but there was no match in any database. They created a flyer with his photo and a description of what he looked like, and they distributed it all over Philadelphia. They even included the flyer in every single gas bill that was mailed out to residents in the city. And I believe there were like thousands of flyers sent out. They also took a post-mortem photograph of the boy, and they dressed him up and posed him in a seated position to make it look like he was alive, hoping that maybe someone would recognize him that way. And the tips started pouring in. Hundreds of tips. People calling in saying, I think that's my neighbor's kid, or I think I saw that boy at a store once. But every single lead went nowhere. None of them panned out. And so the little boy remained unidentified. Now, because nobody claimed him, he was originally buried in a potter's field, which is basically just like an unmarked grave for people who have no family or no money for a proper burial. And he stayed there for decades. But in 1998, his body was exhumed and he was reburied at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. A funeral home donated a plot, a coffin, and a headstone. And the headstone read, America's Unknown Child. And underneath it said, Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy. And from that point on, the community really adopted him. People would leave flowers and toys at his grave. They wanted to make sure that even though nobody knew who he was still loved and remembered. Over the years, there were a lot of theories about who this little boy was and who might have been responsible. One of the most talked about theories involved a foster home that was located about 1.5 miles from where his body was found. In 1960, a medical examiner's employee named Remington Bristow became obsessed with this case. He worked on it until he passed away in 1993. And at one point, he contacted a psychic who told him to look for a house that matched a certain description. And the psychic actually led him directly to this foster home. Now, when Bristow attended an estate sale at that foster home, he found a bassinet that was very similar to the box that the boy's body was found in. So he thought, maybe the boy had been living in this foster home, maybe something happened to him there, and then his body was left at that location. But investigators were never able to prove that theory. They didn't have enough evidence to charge anyone. Another theory came from a woman who came forward in 2002. She was known only as Martha, or M, and she claimed that her mother had purchased a little boy from his birth parents and then caused his passing. She said the boy's name was Jonathan, and she believed he was the boy in the box. But the problem was that Martha had a history of mental illness, and police weren't sure if her story was reliable. They tried to verify it, but neighbors who lived near Martha's house during that time period said they never saw a little boy living there. So that theory also went nowhere. So for decades, this case just sat cold. Investigators kept working on it, but they had no new leads. And then in the 1990s, DNA technology became available. So in 1998, when the boy's body was exhumed and reburied, they took DNA samples from one of his teeth. They created a DNA profile, but at that time, they didn't get any hits. There were no matches in any databases, so the case stayed cold. But then, in 2019, the Philadelphia Police Department decided to try again with newer DNA technology. They got a court order to exhume the boy's body a second time, and they collected more DNA samples. And this time, they partnered with a company called Identifinders International, which specializes in forensic genetic genealogy. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically where they take DNA from an unidentified person and upload it to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch. And then they try to find relatives who have also uploaded their DNA to those databases. And from there, they can build out a family tree and hopefully identify the person. So that's exactly what they did with the boy in the box. They uploaded his DNA to these databases, and in October 2021, they got a hit. A second cousin, once removed from the boy, had uploaded their DNA to GEDmatch. So investigators reached out to that person's mother, who was a first cousin of the boy, and they asked her to submit her DNA as well. And she did, and that allowed them to identify the boy's parents. Once they had the parents' names, they got a court order for the boy's birth certificate, and that's when they finally learned his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Born January 13th, 1953. He was from West Philadelphia, and he had been living near 61st and Market Streets. On December 8th, 2022, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw held a press conference to announce Joseph's identity to the world. And it was like such an emotional moment. She said, "For 65 years, the story of America's unknown child has haunted this community, the Philadelphia Police Department, our nation, and the world. When people think about the boy in the box, a profound sadness is felt, not just because a child lost his life, but because his entire identity and his rightful claim to own his existence was taken away. And she was right. For so long, this little boy had no name. He was just the boy in the box. But now finally, he had his identity back. He was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. And on January 13th, 2023, which would have been Joseph's 70th birthday, a new memorial was unveiled at his grave with his full name and his photo. Now, even though Joseph's identity is known, the case of what happened to him is still unsolved. Police Captain Jason Smith, who oversees the homicide unit, said at the press conference that they have suspicions about who might be responsible, but he wouldn't share those suspicions publicly because it's still an ongoing investigation. He also said that because the case is so old, it's going to be an uphill battle to solve it. He said, "We may not make an arrest, we may never make an identification, but we're going to do our darndest to try." And that's the sad reality, you guys. Joseph's parents are both deceased. His mother, Mary Elizabeth Abel, passed away in 1991. His father, Augustus John Zarelli, passed away in 2014. So they can't be held accountable. But Joseph does have living siblings, both on his mother's and his father's side. And police are hoping that maybe one of those siblings, or maybe a neighbor, or maybe someone who knew the family back in the 1950s will come forward with information. Police are also offering a $20,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest and conviction in this case. So if you're listening and you have any information, even if it seems small or insignificant, please call the Philadelphia Police Department's tip line. What breaks my heart about this case, is that Joseph was never reported missing. His parents just moved on with their lives. They split up around the time Joseph's body was discovered. His mother remarried in 1959 and had 2 more children. His father also started a new family that same year, and neither of them ever reported Joseph missing. They just acted like he never existed. It's so disturbing, and the way Joseph's life ended, it's just, it's horrific. He was harmed. He was malnourished. His hair was cut in this rushed, panicked way, almost like someone was trying to disguise him or get rid of evidence. And then his body was just left on the side of the road like he didn't matter. He deserved so much better. But at least now, Joseph has his name back. He's no longer America's unknown child. He's Joseph Augustus Zarelli. And people in Philadelphia, they still visit his grave. They leave flowers, they leave toys, they make sure he's remembered. And I think that's really beautiful. So, that's the story of the boy in the box, a mystery that haunted Philadelphia for over 65 years. And while we now know his name, we still don't know who is responsible for taking his life. But investigators are still working on it, and they're hoping that someone out there has information that can finally bring justice for Joseph. All right, true crime besties, that's what I've got for you today. Let me know what you think about this case. Do you think the person responsible will ever be identified? Or do you think too much time has passed? Let me know in the comments or leave me a review. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any new episodes. And until the next one, be nice, don't harm people, and definitely don't forget that every child deserves to be loved and protected. Bye, guys.